Testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3.
Test 1 2. Test 1 2.
Okay,
Test 1 2. Test 1 2.
which probably means channel 8's working good too. So, okay.
Test 1 2. Test 1 2. We're live. All right, the broadcast recording should be live, so whenever you're ready, Mayor or Mayor Pro Tem, whoever's sharing the meeting, we are good to go.
Thank you, Dylan. This is a special meeting of the City Council. Members of the public can view this meeting live on Channel 8, the city's website, and YouTube. Live Spanish translation services are being provided for tonight's council meeting by telephone. Please dial 720-386-9023 and use code 104091 *.
En español para esta reunión del Consejo Municipal por teléfono. Marque el número 720-386-9023 y utilice el código 104091 #.
If you are a council member, please be sure to unmute your microphone when speaking for the broadcast and recording. I would like to call this special meeting tonight for January 31st, 2022. The time is now 7:06. I would like to ask the city clerk to take roll call.
Mayor Huseman? Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas?
Present.
Councilmember Madera?
Present.
Councilmember Davis? Present. Councilmember Noble?
Present.
Councilmember Hurst?
Present.
Councilmember Grimes?
Present.
Councilmember Ford?
Present.
Councilmember Douglas?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Alan Thomas, you have a quorum.
I'd like to make a motion to excuse those members not present.
I'll second the motion.
So there is a motion passed to excuse those not present. I believe it's the mayor. Is the mayor present actually in the Zoom meeting? Because he is present, right? So I guess he did. Oh, he did. Okay. So they're all, I'm sorry. So all the members are present then. Oh, he didn't. Oh, okay. So he's not. Okay. So then we will, since he didn't respond as being present, then, oh, here he is. There he is. Okay. All right. Okay, now I'd like to introduce the resolution 2022-13, the third amendment for agreement for appointment of the municipal court judge. Do any council members have any questions for staff? So I'm looking for a motion and second to adopt Resolution 2022-13. Yeah, I can't see who's picking there, so you have to raise your hand. Okay. Councilwoman Noble,
So moved.
can you guys raise your hand? I can't see who's physically raise your hand. Okay. Councilman Member Hurst.
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion? I want to ask the city clerk to read the title.
Resolution 2022-13, a resolution authorizing Third Amendment of Agreement for appointment of municipal court judge.
I would like to take a voice vote by a show of hands. And all of those in favor, raise your hands. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so the majority passes. Okay. So it passes, let's see, I can't see the mayor's vote. Unanimous? Yeah, okay.
The mayor raised his hand.
Okay, thank you, thanks, okay. So the vote passes unanimous. At this time, I'd like to invite Armando Guardiola, Human Resources Director, to introduce the interview process.
Thank you. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council. Today, we have our finalists for the judge interviews, and we will be having 3 interviews. Each interview will be 50 minutes, following with questions if permitted. And I would like to bring in the first finalist, which is Judge Bowen. Judge Bowen, you want to turn on your microphone, please?
Good evening.
Good evening. We'll get started. So we'll, like I said, myself and Jen, who is the HR manager, will be reading questions, and you'll be answering questions, and afterwards, if there is time permitted, you can ask additional questions. So we'll get started. Why do you want to be the judge in Commerce City? What led you to apply at this point in your career? And where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
Well, thank you for inviting me. All good questions. So I have lived in Adams County all of my life. And after going to law school, my first job was with the law firm of Gaylor and Merrigan here in Commerce City, where I worked as, among other things, city prosecutor for this town and the city of Brighton, until they annexed into each other, and then Bob had to select, and he chose Commerce City. And I then went into private practice on my own, had my own office a little bit in Westminster, and then I came back to Commerce City. I felt like this is a community that spoke to me, that needed access to legal representation. And so I had an office at 6332 East 72nd Avenue for almost 15 years, until I left to become a magistrate in Adams County, and then county court judge. At this point in my career, I've now worked for the state courts for 21 years, over 21 years, and I am looking to retire, but I'm not ready to retire. I'm ready to continue to give back to the community, and this is part of that community. And I believe that I think a new challenge of working at the municipal level, as I had before, as a municipal prosecutor and then a municipal associate judge here in Commerce City, Brighton, Wheat Ridge, North Glen, Thornton. I was a lot of people's backup. And I felt that this would be a great opportunity to bring the skills that I have back into the community, and a challenge for me. COVID's been a real interesting time for us all. The courts are changing pretty dramatically. I think we've adapted remarkably well at the state level, and I'd want to see that this was an opportunity to bring some of what I have, my skill sets, to this level and move ahead further in my career.
Thank you.
Judge Bowen, what do you think the working relationship should be between the judge and the court administrator? And secondly, what do you consider to be the role of the court administrator?
Well, the court administrators, it's a huge role, and that's a person who has to be abreast of what's happening regarding the court as far as volume, the kinds of cases that are appearing, the number of people, what are the staffing requirements to ensure that the court's able to bring about timely and appropriate resolution of those cases. And you can't do that if you don't have a strong administrator, if you don't have somebody who has a skill set that it's not completely different from the judge, but it augments the judge. They need to work pretty symbiotically so that they come out with a good product for the community. And as trends shift, trends change, they can work to anticipate the needs of the court so that we have meaningful opportunity for people in the community to come before the court and feel that they're heard.
Describe your judicial philosophy regarding juveniles who would appear in your court. And this is a two-part. And how would you work, or have you worked with juvenile diversion programs in the past?
Yes, and it's evolved a lot over time. Part of that is the change in philosophy, both at the state level and the resources and the view that we have with juveniles, that we really can make a difference. That's the opportunity to intervene early and affect a positive change so that there aren't continuing issues. Now, early in my career, I was a guardian ad litem. I represented young people who sometimes were involved in the criminal justice system. Sometimes they were abused or neglected. But in that summer of violence, so-called summer violence in 1993, I had one of those cases, and every night on ABC's Nightline, Ted Koppel led with a film version of me. I have a copy of it, not here tonight, but walking into the courthouse with a 14-year-old in handcuffs who was, he was in foster care because he had been abused, and then he ended up in a very unfortunate criminal situation. So I've seen it and how we can make differences, especially early on. Now, in Westminster, they had a teen court. We worked back in the 90s with the teen court. They also implemented one up in Brighton. We worked on it up there as well. And then becoming a magistrate, I worked with one of my assignments as a magistrate was the juvenile dockets, handling both dependency and neglect and delinquency matters, and the truancy docket. And there was a pretty, I felt, innovative truancy consortium between this school district, 14, 12, 27J, Westminster, working on trying to intervene on the truancy side earlier so that we could get better outcomes before they entered into, what some people unfortunately call the pipeline, that unfortunate opportunity when people maybe they start as a young person and lack guidance or education opportunity or redirection, restorative justice, whatever it is. So I think we can be impactful and make changes at that level in a way that I think I have worked with specialty courts, including the Veterans Treatment Court in Adams County. Data tells us from our experience that it works to implode services, to make resources available to people in need so that they can disengage from a repetitive path. And so having had those experiences, I absolutely am in favor of making those changes, implementing programming that will change lives, the trajectory of lives.
Without living in Commerce City, how do you make sure you're in touch with and understand the residents of Commerce City?
It's an issue. This is a city, I think I mentioned before that it was a community with an identity challenge right now. There's a very broad new area. There's older historic boundaries of Commerce City. And then there's the industrial business community, all intertwined. I regularly traverse into the metro area, and I specifically come down 85 and then over to Quebec, and so that I can kind of see what's changed over time, and a lot has changed over time. I don't live in the community, but I do feel like I have a connection to the community, having formerly owned my office building. I want to check how it's doing. I have friends and associates who live in the community, and I'll make it a point, if this were to be an opportunity extended to me, to be in more touch with the community.
Talk to us about your thoughts on diversity and implicit bias, both in the community and in the courtroom.
Well, it's real. There's no question that we're all subject to implicit bias. I think our best efforts are when we can be made aware of what those biases are, so that if in fact the situation before us challenges us in those arenas, that we're able to put a check on it, be clear that that is an issue for us. It could be that maybe I'm not the judicial officer who needs to hear this case. Maybe we'll have an alternate judge hear that case, or maybe we'll take a break and I'll revisit that. I don't think that just happens. I think it's important that there is meaningful, direct training from the various groups that might come in and talk to us about why it's important that we have an awareness, cultural sensitivities, so that we're able to be meaningful and empathetic to the people that appear before us. I know I have a bias. I'm pro-education, and I really want to see people get their education to move ahead with their lives to better their circumstances. But not everybody's had the opportunities that I have had as a white male in Adams County in the United States of America. And so I think it's important that we are aware of what those might be and how they work in really all our facets of life, but particularly in the courtroom, because those scales of justice and that justice is blind, that's people's expectation, and it should be. And we should be able to meaningfully engage our population.
With the demand for technology-driven processes, how will you continue to support automation to improve court processing, proceedings, and operations?
Well, it can be a challenge if it's not well done. But what we've seen in the past 2 years, and I'll tell you just from my personal experience, for many years up at the Adams County Courthouse, we would do child support hearings by telephone. It's bringing a person in from the Department of Corrections was not financially appropriate. We'd walk them down to a case manager's office. They'd get on a telephone. We'd do that hearing. Everybody seemed fine with it, but that's where it stopped. It was rare, very rare, if we even had telephone testimony in a courtroom. And then when the pandemic hit, we switched literally within a month or 5 weeks to my courtroom, where it's all WebEx, which is Zoom relative, and it's the exception when a person appears live in my courtroom. That's not the same for every courtroom at the courthouse, but and we can do it. We were successful. People appreciate it. They appreciate the opportunity to have their issue or challenge resolved in the courtroom without getting on a bus for 2 hours to go to the courthouse in Brighton, or to arrange extra daycare, or they can go out into their car on a break and tell their boss, hey, I need 15 minutes, and get online. And we have really successfully done that. And I'm proud to say at the county court level in our county, I was one of the first people to innovate that, including not just telephone, not just WebEx, but a camera in the courtroom focused on the podium in case someone did appear live. There are other courtrooms in our district that don't have that. And so, we looked for ways for it to be still a meaningful opportunity to engage, but get the work done. Now, some things need to be done in person. There are people who are perfectly motivated not to appear in courtrooms. And so we need to be able to deal with that. But I think the technology that the Adams County Sheriff's Department has implemented at the jail has been, heroic to get done what we've been able to get done during this very trying time. And it proves it works. We can do it.
What is your experience working with pro se defendants, and is your approach any different working with these individuals versus those who are represented?
So the pro se population is growing. It's expensive to get an attorney, if at all. Some people question whether they should have to have one. So before I became a full-time magistrate, and one of my assignments as a full-time magistrate was handling small claims docket, but I also did that at night in Adams County. And if people are going to go to court at night, they really want to fight. No attorneys. We do long dockets. I did that for many years before I became a full-time magistrate. And I had the small claims court docket as a part-time magistrate in Weld County as well. So people want to come to the courthouse and they want to be heard. And that's whether they're represented or they're not. The pro se litigant, they're not sure necessarily where to stand or how to do this. They haven't done it before. So you need to kind of guide them. And it doesn't mean that you bend the rules or treat them in ways that you wouldn't treat any defendant. But you explain things. And one of the things I do is I teach, and I've been teaching for many years, 15 years at Ames Community College, and the past 4 years at Metro. And I teach criminal justice classes, and I teach social work classes, and I work with interns so I like teaching. And I like when it comes time to summarize what's happened in the courtroom to explain to people why I'm doing what I'm doing. And that means pulling out the book and reading the words of the statute. If you're going to be a landlord, you need to look at this. If you're going to enter into a contract, you really should do this. I know what's in an automobile purchase contract because of small claims court. I never read those before. But you do enough of them, and you have to explain them, what a contract is, where the law comes from. It comes from Old England. It's incorporated into the common law in the United States. We've adopted it here in Colorado. Here's where we go. Give people time to have their say, explain why you're making a decision, and then move on. I like to say that I like to spend a little time on little things, so I have big time for big things.
Commerce City currently holds court proceedings on Wednesdays and Thursdays, with additional responsibilities occurring throughout the week. Do you have the ability, and are you committed to putting in hours outside of just Wednesdays and Thursdays?
Yes. So I'm currently a sitting county court judge. I will need to retire. It was my intention to retire this year. This will move it up a little if I'm selected, but this will be primarily what I'll be doing. I will be spending some time with my grandchildren, but this is primarily where my focus will be, and properly so. We're primed on an opportunity to make a difference in people's lives, and I'd like to be part of that.
Thank you.
What methods do you use, and what is your experience with managing a heavy docket or workload?
So I work in a very busy courthouse, in a busy courtroom, and my share of the docket is my share of the docket. And I help with other courtrooms when they need it. I am used to a heavy docket. The day I got sworn in as a lawyer, I did night court for the city of Brighton, and we had about 60 cases because no one wanted to do night court anymore. The new kid can go do it. I've always handled my dockets. The key to handling heavy dockets is to spend a little time on little things, big time on big things, so that people can believe that they can be heard. And there are levels at which it's no longer appropriate to have that number of cases on a docket. It's been my experience during this COVID time that staggered dockets have their place, perhaps based on what kind of a case it is, or if you're having someone who's appearing from another jurisdiction or another in custody. But my experience is show up on time, sit down in your chair, start your docket, and do it. And by 5 o'clock, you're almost always done. You're trying to make sure that you did it well. And but we need to be mindful of staff. So, I'm a big boy. 200 and too many pounds, 6'5". I can do a lot of things. But you need to be mindful that there are other people that are trying to keep up with the paperwork, trying to make sure the audio's working, trying to make sure that people are called up before the court. Maybe this case isn't ready, but you need to move on to this case. And very much like tonight, you have to improvise, overcome, and adapt, and get the work done. And so I'm not afraid of a heavy caseload, but I'm mindful that a heavy caseload could be a sign of something, that maybe it needs to be broken into smaller bite-sized chunks, both for staff, for myself. There's a study out of Stanford University and a university in Israel that said you want to be sentenced by your judge first thing in the morning or first thing after lunch because their blood sugar's higher. And so you don't want to overdo it. There are times when I need to take a break. I stand up and I take a break. My assistant, I try to be very guarded of my judicial assistants so that, we're all doing our best because for that person, most of the people who live in our communities, that's going to be their one time they engage with the court. We have a lot of people that come back, but the majority of people, they don't know where the courthouse is. If you ask them to come in to be a juror, you have to give them a map. So we want to make sure it's a meaningful experience for them. At the same time, we need to be mindful of their time, respectful of their energies, so that we can get all that we need to get done.
As a follow-up, what does a heavy docket look like to you in terms of numbers? If you had to estimate how many cases in a day?
11 pages of 12 cases per page is a heavy docket. It's unreasonable, it's unacceptable. It happens from time to time. So I have done dockets with 100 cases, and municipal cases are on the spectrum of cases, are not preliminary hearing, felony. People are going to spend life in prison, but they're meaningful to that person, and that's not a reasonable number of cases to handle. Not if they're being handled in the courtroom. Now, if they're on the day's work to be done, and a third of those people will be handling them at the window or administratively, maybe. But again, I would need to see what the kinds of cases you're getting, how you're getting them, and ensure that it can be done in the time allotted. Otherwise, maybe it's time to expand.
Aside from continuing education credits that judicial positions are required to complete, who do you seek guidance or mentorship from when you have issues or need a second opinion?
Well, it's always good to have a second opinion. One of my friends, Jeff Romeo, a retired county court judge, said, Brian, you can talk yourself into anything when you're alone. And so it is good to have mentors on the bench nearby or by phone or text that you can speak to, who you respect their opinion, who have had similar opportunities as judicial officers, so that they can, whether it's commiserate or direct or say, look at this statute, or did you consider this? That's all important. Every once in a while we'll have a careless driving resulting in death case. And when that happens, I just get up. After that case is over, I would tell my staff, let's take a break. I walk into the hallway. I try and find somebody I can decompress with a little. It's invaluable to have peers that you can speak with. It's just healthy.
Emotions are always high in the courtroom by all involved parties, and that may lead to a judge becoming upset. What would you do when you become upset on the bench while ensuring you are issuing a just verdict or decision? And if you could give us an example.
So I have a couple of examples, but the one I just referred to actually led us into that. Careless resulting in death those are terrible cases, because if they're charged as careless driving, or that's the result of the case, then careless means careless. It doesn't mean reckless. It doesn't mean substances were involved, drugs or other issues. It means it was careless. And I tell people, there is nothing I can do or say that will bring your loved one back into the world. So here's what the law says that I can do. Here's what I believe is appropriate, and then I'll take a break. I've had also heated cases where tempers flared, and I'll never forget, I had a lovely clerk, Danielle, one time, who just reached over with a sticky and slapped it on my bench right in front of me. We need a break. And she knew I needed a break. And so I try to be mindful of that before others have to remind me of that. And I try to be mindful of that for the participants in the hearing, so that we can all clear ourselves a little bit, come back to the pointed issue, and resolve it. And that could mean entering a written order so that there's some time to take some space and distance. There's probably not going to be a lot of opportunity for that at a municipal court level, but there may be cases where it's appropriate. And as an example, you've had shooting cases where officers were involved in shootings, and but they were still being resolved in the municipal court, and tensions were high. And yes, we need to step back, make sure we're clear, double check what we're doing, including myself, and then move forward. So most people, they come to court, they want a resolution, they want an answer. They don't always like the answer you give them, but they like having an answer. And so try not to take a lot of things under advisement, because that becomes a snowball and it can overwhelm you as well. But there will be those cases where it's appropriate for that to happen.
All right, Judge Bowen, those are all of the questions that we have for you this evening. There is some time left in our interview, so at this point, we would like to open it up to council. If anybody has any questions, please raise your hand.
Not all at once. Sir.
Just turned on so you can hear me as well. You mentioned earlier some of the issues related to administering justice with the COVID issues. There's not a person in here that has not read about cases that have gone way beyond my terminology's not correct, but quick and, quick trial, basically. I personally know somebody that's been sitting behind bars now for 2 years and has yet to go to court over this thing. So that's not swift and justice. If, God forbid, this COVID thing continued on like this, some of these cases that you could potentially be involved in, what sort of steps would you take to try to speed that up? I may not be asking it as clearly as I should.
No, it's very clear. So the adage is, justice delayed is justice denied. And particularly for somebody who's in custody, and when they're in custody about that issue. So I have people that are waiting for trials in my docket, but they're not in custody based on my case. They're being held on something else. But in any event, statutorily, so the Constitution says that we're entitled to a speedy trial, and that's been defined statutorily in the state of Colorado as 180 days. And because of COVID, it has been extended, and now extended a second time. Now, I was able to, and many of my fellow judges were able to get about 11 jury trials in between the reinstituting jury trials and it getting shut off again because of the COVID numbers in the county. But it is not justice if someone's in custody that long. At the same time, we have confrontation issues that people are entitled to confront the people that are accusing them of whatever their wrong is. And we need to be able to do that in a meaningful and safe manner so that we're able to make headway. We have come up with, pursuant to what used to be Tri-County's guidelines and the state's guidelines, come up with social distancing mechanisms in order to conduct those trials. But I could see in the future where a home rule city may choose to allow trials to the court that is without a jury, perhaps by WebEx or Zoom. That'd be a bit of an experiment. Everybody would need to agree, this is what we're going to do, we're going to try it. If it doesn't work out, everybody still is made whole. But we are looking for alternatives. And simply to say, push the pause button indefinitely is not meaningful, and that it can't continue. But it will for a while because of the overriding health concerns that are very real. So it's a dilemma, it's a challenge, but I think it's something we're up to, and we may look into ways that we might be able to assist. Maybe not with your friend's case at the level that it sounds like it's very serious, but certainly at our municipal level. Sir.
So how do you see yourself in this role outside of the courtroom?
So the municipal judge is, really the face of the court. And it's an opportunity to step into the community, to let them know we're here, that we're open for business, we need to get things done. I think it is an opportunity to meet with community groups, get feedback on how they believe things are working. Until COVID hit, we started having meetings all the time. I was in our Rotary group, and I also ran the Adams County Court for Veterans as their presiding judge, and I used to go out into the community and meet with groups and explain what our program was, how it worked, why it mattered. The state has a program called Our Courts, where it's an opportunity to go out and do just that, and I could see certainly innovating and going out into the community and letting people on an introductory level understand what the courts are, what we're doing, and why we're here. I have been called on to judge a pie eating contest at the Adams County Fair, but there are those opportunities as well. I swear in the school boards in District 27J. Used to do a lot of weddings. And so it's really an opportunity to show that there are different facets and that we're listening, that we're aware that there's a greater community out there. I may have mentioned this before. My wife grew up here over on Grape Street, and she used to hear, "Here comes Rusty," as the rabbit used to go at Mile High Kennel Club. And so, I have some connection here. I wouldn't be afraid to come into this community. I used to work here, and I was a property owner here, and I think there's plenty of opportunities for a municipal judge to help in the community.
And then I got one more for you. There's legislation that comes from the state from time to time that affects the court.
Yep.
So how do you see yourself keeping council informed, and what role do you see yourself in?
Well, it's kind of a dual role. There are a lot of things lately that have been mandated, that the state's saying we're going to do this and you're going to do it this way. And so I would need to be abreast of what those are, how they might impact court function, and what the council might see as options. The city attorney also would have a role in that, providing information to the council as to what are upcoming changes, how they need to be implemented, what we might expect from those. And there are great community resources that I could bring to bear back to the council. There's a municipal judges organization and the prosecutors organizations, so that we can all try and keep up with really what's been a big wave of changes from the legislature regarding criminal justice matters. So my role is educator, and I'm a kind of a natural educator, so I'm happy to do that if you want it. If you tell me shut up, I'll shut up.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions?
Thank you. Thank you so much for interviewing tonight, Judge Bowen. we're both members of the Silver Silver Club.
You are?
How much longer do you anticipate your career to keep going?
Well, as I've indicated, I'm probably not going to go past the end of the year at the state level, but I do intend to be quite busy. I could see 8 to 10 years, probably 10 at the outside. That's realistic. At the same time, I think this would be a great opportunity to help forge the next chapter in this court.
Very good. And then I have one more question for you. How would you handle Spanish-only speaking cases?
Well, we use interpreter services. We're mandated to do that through the state. And, you know, I worked in this community at the municipal court when we used to have the custodial staff come out and interpret for people. And bless them, they did it. Heroic job. But we would utilize those services, irrespective if they're Spanish or otherwise. I'm not fluent. I have what they call a thick tongue, and so I don't speak well. But I have phrases that I can navigate people until we get the process started during a particular hearing. So we do them all the time at the courthouse, a large variety of languages. I'd be very confident in our ability to do that.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
No more questions?
Okay. I do have a question.
Please.
So in order, if you were to select me as to be your next municipal judge, I would need 60 days to give notice to the state. Is that something that's workable?
At this point, I can't answer that question as far as I don't know until we actually sit down and do an executive session, depending on any finalists. But that would definitely, I appreciate that giving us, you know, the warning, the 60 days. But at this time, I can't answer that.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to your selection.
Thanks, sir. Good evening, Ms. Martinez.
Good evening.
We are going to get started. For time's sake, we're just going to go over some questions, and you'll be answering some questions. Or answering, yeah. Sorry, a little nervous, it seems like.
I'm not going to bite.
Thank you. Why do you want to be the judge in Commerce City, and what led you to apply at this point in your career? Where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years?
Okay. So I applied for the judicial position in Commerce City because I genuinely felt that I could follow in the footsteps and continue to grow and lead in a lot of ways that Judge Juarez had done. He's done an amazing job. He's someone I've known for a very long period. Can I do that? Is that okay? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I wasn't sure. There's quite a few reasons. I would say in terms of wanting to be a judge, period, I find it a big honor to be able to have a law license, especially coming from an immigrant community. And so for me, I take it as a calling and as a noble service and as something to give back to the community. Commerce City is the community I was drawn to primarily because of what I know about it, what I've lived about it. And I think the growing population deserves to have another judge that reflects the community in a lot of ways, and I think that I can do that. And so I was really motivated to apply for this position because I felt that I would be a really good fit and would be a good example for others who grew up just like me. In terms of my career, I have been in practice since 2015, and I've kind of like I said earlier, have always viewed the practice of law as a very noble but also a privileged kind of thing to have. And so I always knew I would want to give back to the community more than just in my practice, and I think one of the biggest ways you do that is by serving at the bench. And I do think it's very important to remember that being on the bench is serving your community. Where I see myself in 5 to 10 years, hopefully here, on the bench here. I don't see this position as a stepping stone, and I don't see it as a stepping stone to other things, and I don't see it as a stepping stone to retirement either. I would really like to see myself be able to grow with the city and with City Council, the Court Administrator's Office here, and continue to be a part of that Commerce City family. And so this for me is not a fly-by-night application where I'm just trying to rack up judicial positions. I see it as a commitment to a community that I would be honored to serve.
What do you think the working relationship should be between the judge and the court administrator? And what do you consider, what do you consider to be the role of the court administrator?
I think the court administrator is a very important role. They serve the court in an administrative capacity, and I get how redundant that sounds, but it really does explain a lot of it. The judge is not in a position to do some of the things that someone who will administrate the courts will do. When it comes to implementing technology, when it comes to doing some of the other administrative tasks for a courthouse, those don't fall on the judge, and not because it shouldn't. It's because the judge usually does not have the experience and the knowledge and background as an admin to do those tasks. And so they have to be with someone who is educated and experienced in those kind of areas. And I know that court administrators do a lot. They make sure that courthouses are running consistently, effectively, efficiently, and equitably in a lot of different ways. And so the relationship between a judge and a court admin is a very tight one, and getting along and respecting one another is very important. And treating them as an equal is very important. I think that sometimes the black robe disease gets to some people, and they necessarily see people as staff and not as equals and co-collaborators. And working with a court admin, I think, has to be a very much inherently collaborative and respectful dynamic.
Describe your judicial philosophy regarding juveniles who would appear in your court, and have you worked with juvenile diversion programs in the past?
I have. as a defense attorney and as a guardian ad litem. So I have worked in both of those capacities with juveniles. And so my experience is obviously not one from the bench, but kind of more on the ground. I love to work with juveniles. That's a big passion of mine. Working with teenagers it's something that I've always been very lucky to do in a lot of different parts of my life and career. And so I think it's very important to recognize that all aspects of the legal system should include, to some extent, rehabilitation and forgiveness and reentry into the community, particularly at a municipal level, but even more so for juveniles. I mean, these kiddos are our future, and by labeling them and working with them and putting them in these boxes that they may never get out of down the line, not only diminishes their capacity and their ability to grow and flourish, but it hurts the community, because these are the people that grow into adults and stay in your neighborhoods. These will be your neighbors. This will be the person that you're working with or working around. And you want them to, whatever occurred in their juvenile time, be able to overcome that and grow from it and then be part of society in a great way. And so to not deal with juveniles with an even extra delicate touch and with extra eyes on them and extra support is doing a disservice not just to them individually, but to the community as a whole.
Thank you.
Without living in Commerce City, how do you make sure you're in touch with and understand the residents of Commerce City?
I think in that sense, I'm pretty privileged that while I don't live here, a lot of my clients do. And so a lot of the clients that I work with, I meet with them in person, and sometimes we'll meet at the rec center, sometimes we'll meet at La Casa del Rey, and we'll have lunch and talk about their case. And so for me, also work that I've done with the Colorado Hispanic Bar Association has done a lot of projects in Commerce City, just because there is a strong Latino population here as well. And so I think that in very different capacities, I've been able to keep in touch with the city of Commerce City and with this community. And it's a reason why I want to be here and why I applied here. It's because this is the group, these are the people I've been representing now for the last 4.5 years, and I want to keep being in their lives in some sort of way.
Talk to us about your thoughts on diversity and implicit bias, both in the community and in the courtroom.
Implicit bias it's an ugly thing that needs to be acknowledged and accepted for existing. I think that sometimes what happens is that the conversation gets difficult because a lot of individuals attach malice and intent to what implicit biases come out. And by being implicit, it's actually the complete opposite. Most of the time, the person is not aware that these biases are coming out and making them act and react in the ways that they are. And so in terms of in the courtroom, I think a big element there is something that I'm really proud of. When I was president of the Hispanic Bar Association in 2020, we led the charge, I guess, to change our educational rule for attorneys and judges, where we have to earn at minimum 2 credits in equity, inclusion, and anti-bias training to be able to keep your licensure. And so that has passed, and that's going to be starting to take effect next year in terms of attorneys crediting to keep their license. So in that sense, it's obviously a topic very important to me, and I've put my work into it to make sure that some work is done. Because if you're not educated, you can't know where you don't know. If it's not brought out to you and pointed out, it's very difficult to be able to grow and to evolve in that sense and recognize, my intent and my impact don't always line up. And while I could have meant all the great in the world, I really put my foot in my mouth or made an assumption about somebody that was harmful. And until you can reconcile that those two things may not always track, but you can learn and be better, and that way we have better results and better outcomes for individuals in the courtroom, I mean, it's not going to get better unless people recognize it and work on it. And so I'm glad that that's something that I was a part of to help improve. In terms of the community, I mean, we see it in a lot of different arenas, and I think that it's up to individuals in positions of leadership to kind of lead by example, and hopefully one of the few times trickling down will hopefully work, in the sense that if we can see that our elected officials, the judges that sit on the bench, and other individuals in positions of power and leadership like that are able to recognize that implicit bias exists and that they're proactively working to remedy that within themselves, and that's something that's an ongoing process for the rest of our lives, that's really the example we want to set for the community.
With the demand for technology-driven processes, how will you continue to support automation to improve court proceedings and operations?
I love that question. So I'm a big tech nerd, and I love virtual court. I think that the law is one of those areas that has a fault or a flaw of saying this is how we've always done things, therefore that is the right way to do them. And just because it's the way we've always done it doesn't necessarily mean it has to stay that way, and it doesn't necessarily mean it was right or that it's right now. And so in terms of implementing processes, I think that keeping court virtual is a huge step in that direction. I think that it alleviates a lot of access to justice issues for individuals who have problems getting to courthouses, taking time off of work. Some of the studies that I've read in papers from the ABA and other organizations talk about having kiosks at municipal buildings like this, where individuals who necessarily don't have the bandwidth to participate in virtual court can access a city building and still do that with a headset, which I know with COVID makes that a little more difficult, but we can disinfect, and there's ways to address that. There's also ways to provide tablets and things like that to other individuals who may be at who may have a barrier to access the technology. Having all electronic filing is also another way of speeding things up, creating automation in the process, and so there is a lot of different ways to implement technology and systems that can make the courts work more effectively and efficiently.
What is your experience working with pro se defendants, and is your approach any different working with these individuals versus those who are represented?
I've never been a judge, so for me that's a little bit of a harder question to answer, but I have had the opportunity to work in a pseudo pro se role, because one of the contracts I have with Adams County is advisory counsel. And an advisory counsel is an attorney appointed to represent not to represent a defendant, to work with and consult a defendant who wants to represent themselves. And so these individuals want to represent themselves, they want to do the trial themselves, their motion hearings, and I get appointed to kind of steer the ship with them. And they determine how they want to present their case, they determine pretty much everything, but I kind of keep them in the bounds of the law. Like, okay, you can't claim self-defense if the alleged assault took place a week after the fight, because the law doesn't allow that. You know, so kind of defining those parameters without telling them what to do is a position I have been in before, and that is in some ways a parallel to what a judge would do working with a pro se defendant, because they cannot provide legal advice, but they are able to kind of guide and steer and provide information in certain ways that they really need to know, and that they're trusting the judge to provide that to them. And so I think some of the best judges that I've been in front of have always been very patient, very understanding, and very clear when they work with pro se defendants. And I think that I would like to carry on that same type of technique so that they don't feel overwhelmed and they feel heard by the process and by the judge in front of them. And then they can hopefully make the right choices as they argue their case.
Commerce City currently holds court proceedings on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and additional responsibilities occur throughout the week. Do you have the ability, and are you committed to putting in hours outside of just Wednesdays and Thursdays?
100%. So yes, I can make those 2 days work, and in addition to that, if I didn't think that I could handle hours outside of that time frame, I wouldn't have applied. I think that would be a disservice to the position, the city, and to myself. And so, no, there would be no issues with that. I'm an independent contractor. I own my own practice, and so I can scale down as much as necessary with no problem.
Thank you.
What methods do you use, and what is your experience with managing a heavy docket or workload?
In terms of managing a heavy workload, again, I am a big fan of systems and processes. When I get a new case that I'm appointed on, I set it up in a program called My Case, and it has all my clients' information. I set dates, I set reminders, I set task reminders. 15 days out, you need to file disclosures. This many days out, So I am a big fan of doing that. I use my tech a lot. And so I think that a lot of that is important and will translate to docket management, because a huge portion of managing your docket is knowing your cases. If you come in there and you're waiting for an attorney or for your clerk or for someone else to kind of get you going, you're already behind the ball. And that's, you got to know your cases. You have to be prepared the minute you get in there. And there's a really fine balance between speaking and pontificating. And so, you need to talk to individuals. You need to make sure they feel like they had the time to have had their voice heard. But then you also have to remember that there's 15 other voices waiting to get heard in the virtual lobby. And everyone's right is important. And so you have to be able to fine tune and find that balance. I think that I'm really lucky that the areas of law that I practice tend to be very heavy dockets. The criminal cases that I do tend to be municipal ones where there's a sheet and a half of cases. The juvenile cases, same thing. We'll see, 20 cases just in the morning. And so you get very efficient at putting your record out there in 20 minutes when there's also 4 other attorneys and the judge who need to fit in the same 20 minutes. And so I know I'm being a little long-winded now, but the long story short, don't be long-winded, and then you can get through your docket.
Aside from continuing education credits, the judicial positions are required to complete. Who do you seek guidance or mentorship from when you have issues or need a second opinion?
In general, as an attorney, I'm very lucky that I have a lot of individuals that I can call friendtors, that are friend mentors, and that I can reach out to whenever I'm stumped, whenever I need a new way to look at something. I've also really been lucky in my role at the Hispanic bar and the Colorado bar and Denver bar to be in positions where I've gotten to know a lot of judicial officers and to grow respectful relationships with them, where I know I can reach out and say, hey, look, Judge Delgado, Magistrate Varmo, Judge Lucero, I'm stuck. Can you help me unstuck? And so I think one of the biggest things is recognizing that we don't know it all and we'll never know it all. And so knowing when to reach out and having the right resources is super important. And I've really grown to respect that idea and really fostered my relationships, because I know I'm a better attorney for my clients by recognizing that I don't know it all and I need to reach out to networks. And so I'm proud of the wide network that I've grown, and I'm sure it'll continue to grow.
Emotions are always high in the courtroom by all involved parties, and that may lead to a judge becoming upset. What would you do when you become upset on the bench while ensuring you are issuing a just verdict or decision? And if you could, please give us an example.
Okay. I think to some extent, part of applying for a job like this is recognizing that you're not going to get emotional on the bench. I think that there's foundationally, I'm not sure that I would let myself do that. And I'm not trying to say I'm a robot. It's just that I think that if you're going to put yourself in a position where you're going to be a steward and face of the law for Commerce City in front of your community, you can't afford to get worked up, to get upset, and to get emotional. If, God forbid, something traumatizing happened in the courtroom or in the virtual courtroom, of course, you take a second, you say, we need to take a recess, gather your thoughts and come back, but I would consider that more of like an exceptional emergency or circumstance. But having a difficult case happen in front of you, I mean, that's all we do. Every case is difficult. Everything involves somebody's life. And so at some point, you have to keep your empathy and your humanity while not getting emotional about it, because they're emotional about it. And you can't also be emotional. You have to show them we can get through this, whether it be a hearing, whether it be a trial, whether it be a sentencing. You have to show that you can keep your cool so that everyone else in your courtroom can as well. And so I don't imagine that I would let that happen. I have a pretty tough skin. I think I remember mentioning in the first round of interviews, as a former ballet dancer, being called, the worst names possible at 15 and being made fun of your weight or your ankles or something like that. I've grown a pretty tough skin. I don't think anyone will throw anything at me in a courtroom that I can't just get through.
All right, Ms. Martinez, those are all of the questions that we have for you this evening. There is time left in our interview, so at this point, we will open it up to counsel. If they have questions, please raise your hand.
Hi, thanks for being with us again tonight. Just curious, how do you transition from defense to handing down judicial decisions?
I think that it shouldn't be a difficult transition, right? Because if you're a prosecutor, you shouldn't have been making those decisions either. And so if you were looking at it in a punitive way, or as a defense, if you were looking at it as trying to get away with something, then maybe you weren't completely looking at the law correctly. And so I think that being able to compartmentalize but see people as human beings and still being empathetic to them while recognizing what the letter of the law is something that I feel comfortable I would be able to do. I work in a lot of collaborative scenarios right now where I don't necessarily say things just because a client wants me to. If I don't necessarily feel comfortable ethically saying that, if I think that it's not true, I will draw that line. But also working collaboratively for families and children is something that has taught me to be able to really see every perspective and every point of view, and recognizing that usually the right answer is the one that's in the middle somewhere. And I think that the law, and especially in municipal ordinances, they're drafted fairly fair. And so you've got your little bit of wiggle room, but within that wiggle room, you really do have strict confines of how to do your job. And it's not my place to either prosecute or defend from the bench. It's to make sure that the law was followed correctly and that that individual in front of me felt like the system worked, even if it wasn't the outcome they wanted. And so I think that I would be able to transition and do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, if you were appointed, how do you envision your first 30 days on the bench? And how do you see your relationship or the transition with the existing court staff?
So the first 30 days, I think, are usually the most important in any start of anything, right? Whether it be as a city council person or mayor or as a judge. You set the tone. And so it would be, to me, very important to get off on the most rightest of foots. And so I would definitely want to have met with the court administrator and other individuals that work at the courthouse, and make sure that we're on the same page, but also inquire of things that were not working in the past that maybe they would want to change or tweak. I think that sometimes soliciting feedback from other individuals in the arena that aren't necessarily the decision maker is really important, because they're not always asked what they think is working and what they think is not working. So I would really like to know, well, what are some of the things that you're like, this was great, do not change this, please? And then what are some of the ones that you're like, I really wish that would have gotten reassessed and looked at again? Other things that would be really important to me that might take more than the first 30 days is looking into getting more specialty courts in Commerce City. I know that Aurora and Lakewood and Denver, they have their outreach court, they have veterans court, they have mental health and family treatment courts. And so I think that Commerce City being a large city and a continually growing city, and one that's going to, I think, really be the face of Colorado. I mean, there's a reason why USA Weekly talked about Adams County and talked about Commerce City in particular, and it's because it is really growing to be a beautiful reflection of what America can be. And so I think part of that is making sure that the courts offer everything that the community needs, and part of that is restorative justice, part of that is rehabilitative and specialty courts. And those are things that I would really like to see brought here that we don't have as much of right now. Guess I went outside of 30 days, sorry.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions for Ms. Martinez? Nope. Well, thank you, Ms. Martinez, for joining us tonight. And we'll get a hold of you with some more information.
Thank you, and I just want to say I really appreciate the time and the fact that I, was selected as a finalist. Growing up as, the daughter of Cuban refugees who were making sure I wasn't pregnant at 15, to see me interviewing for a judicial position is just, it's amazing. And I appreciate all of you giving me the platform and the opportunity to, fight for this dream of mine, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Ms. Martinez, sorry, we actually allowed the last candidate to ask a question. I don't know if you have any questions for us. I just want to make sure we're keeping everybody on the same page.
Who would I ask it to? The room at large.
You have a lot of people here, whoever you want to.
Well, in terms of city council, what are some of the deficiencies you're seeing with the municipal court, and what are the things that you want to see your judge bring to the table to make things better? Anyone?
Stab at it. Quite honestly, Judge Juarez has been fantastic, and I think it's hard to really say there's a deficiency there. We just don't hear complaints, and I think that's a good thing. So that may not answer your question, but as far as the service we've had from Judge Juarez, I cannot complain, and we just hope to be able to fill his shoes.
I'd like to echo that as well. So it would just be that we would want you to fill his shoes.
I think I can fill those shoes, but I definitely recognize they are some very fine shoes to fill, because Judge Juarez is a great man and has been a great judge. So I recognize.
I obviously echo exactly that same sentiment. I think one of the key things for me is to really work with our court staff and really develop that relationship. We're growing, as you called out, and we talk about this often on councils, that we're in that transition phase from being a small town even to a city.
Yeah.
And not only that, a city that's becoming more of a player in the metro. And so how do we grow, and how do we work with our staff to see the needs kind of in front of us and start to build plans to how we can get there? Some of the programs that you're talking about are exactly what I'm referring to. Is you can't grow that way and just keep operating like a small court. It may be working today. I'm not suggesting it's not, but what is it going to be in 5 years when our population's 80,000 or somewhere along? We're going to have to take a different approach, and I really want the next municipal judge to really work with staff to establish how we get there.
Yeah, and I think to that point, I would be ready, willing, and able to do that, and to not have my my judicial hat split elsewhere. And I'll leave it at that.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Martinez.
Thank you. Have a good night. I know it's been a long one. Thank you, everyone streaming.
Virtual shakes.
Welcome, Judge Klein.
Take this off. Okay.
Yes, you can take that off.
Thank you.
So we're going to get started, and we'll be asking some questions. I'm over here, sorry.
Thank you.
It's the Wizard of Oz. So we'll go ahead and get started. Why do you want to be the judge in Commerce City, and what led you to apply at this point in your career? And where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
All good questions. And thank you for asking them. I talked a little bit about it last time, but I want to be the judge in Commerce City because I'm a resident in Adams County. I want to make a difference in the place where I live. I work here as a backup now, and so I'm aware of the great things that Judge Juarez has done here, and it would be my goal to continue those. He cares a lot about this city, and that would be my intention as well. I want to help especially the youth in this community as well as in Adams County at large. It's my home and where I want to make the difference. The reason I'm going for these positions at this point in my career, and you've seen my resume, I do have a lot of judgeships, and you may be concerned about my schedule, but I did a lot of thinking and a lot of contemplating. I'm really loyal to the places that I work, and it was a hard decision for me to say, I'm going to make the leap and move away from some of these places because it's right for me and it's right for my family, and I think that I can do the best job here, being at a place that is a very stable position rather than just filling in. And so that's the reason that I'm applying at this time, because it's the right time for myself and my family. I have 2 boys that are 14 and 11, and they're okay without me being there every night. They can make mac and cheese these days. And so, having more stable and sometimes being away from the home a little more is okay right now. And being here in Adams and in Commerce City is, I think that I am a great candidate for the position.
What do you think the working relationship should be between the judge and the court administrator? And what do you consider to be the role of the court administrator?
It's a key relationship, certainly, and the role of the court administrator is different in every city. So really it is charter-driven or ordinance-driven on what the setup of the court is. So the judge can be the administrator, or there can be a person as administrator. And I think that most places operate under that model. So with that in mind, the judge's role is really to be supportive of the court administrator, as well as to provide input and to be a teammate to that person. So the court administrator might focus more on the court's budget or working on the processes. I work with my court administrator in Brighton on, streamlining things, talking about the legislation, making the updates that we need to that are coming up every year. And so giving suggestions and giving input on those things, as well as working on the virtual things together. So really it is a team situation. You really have to have a good relationship with your court administrator, or it's just not going to be run very smoothly. Oh, and you asked me what the role of the court administrator is. I don't think I would add anything to that. Really, they make the court run. I started out as a clerk, and so I know without the clerks and the court administrator that the place doesn't operate. So they really are essential.
Describe your judicial philosophy regarding juveniles who would appear in your court, and have you worked with juvenile diversion programs in the past?
My philosophy in working with juveniles is to really get to know them. As a prosecutor, I did a lot of that. And it's a lot about just looking at the kiddo and not the parent. You're talking to the kid and talking to them about what they did, trying to get a sense of where they are. And sometimes mom and dad want to jump in, but it's really redirecting to talking with the juvenile to see where they are. I think through the experience that I've had, I can really tell when a kid needs more intervention, or if it's probably a one-off and going to be okay with the class. And that's where working with the diversion is important. We have a really robust diversion program at the 17th Judicial, and I've, when I was a prosecutor in Thornton, worked with them to try to cooperate with our kids being put into their program. So we would refer, I would contact Levon or whoever was working on a case if the kid already had a case to see if they would add ours in. So really cooperative with that system there. They do have more resources than we have available at the municipal level, so it's important to really tap into those. And when they're willing to take our kids, we need to utilize that. Same thing with working with the link. They are willing to take our kids to do the assessments that we need to determine what the best treatment route is for these kiddos. I was talking with the other candidates this evening. There's a bill that is being introduced that would stop the filing of cases into municipal court for kids under 13. I think that's a huge mistake because we have such an ability to get them really on the front end with the interventions that we do have available and give them that kind of personal attention that could potentially stop them from getting charged later. So I think it's really important. It's one of my main focuses.
Without living in Commerce City, how do you make sure you're in touch with and understand the residents of Commerce City?
It's watching council meetings. It's meeting the people when they come here. I am familiar with Commerce City. I lived just across the 85 there over in Henderson at 104th and 85 for some years. I worked at UPS all through law school, so 5020 Ivy was the place that I was every day. So I am familiar with Commerce City, know a little bit about the area. Obviously, sitting here as a judge, I have to be aware of the boundaries and I have to know where those things are. Judge Juarez is fantastic at knowing the location and the layout of the land and where the streets are, where the speeding is really dangerous. And that's my goal too. I want to get to know the city like that to where I can say, all right, you were going 50 and a 35 here, that makes a big difference if you're going 50 and a 35 there. Those are the kind of things that are important to me to know about the community. I want to know more about the schools and about the, get to know the school resource officers, the kind of needs that we have in the schools. All of those things are really important to me.
Talk to us about your thoughts on diversity and implicit bias, both in the community and in the courtroom.
I think that we all have implicit bias, and I think it can be seen as something that is negative, but it can also be something that is very positive once you actually become aware of it. And implicit bias is changing, especially nowadays with COVID and virtual court. You have to think about new kinds of biases. Before it was the person standing in front of you and what in your background makes you have a snap judgment, even if you don't really know that you're having that snap judgment. Well, now I'm in people's living rooms. Am I looking at what the state that they're living in, and is that going to make a difference in my judgment? And so it's really being aware of those kind of things. I think it's important for us because it's my duty to make sure that whenever a person comes into my courtroom that they feel that I have been fair to that person. Not to anybody else, but to that one person, to know that I haven't seen that person for what they're wearing or what the background at their virtual court looks like, or bringing any kind of background that I have into the courtroom. We all bring our life experiences with us into the courtroom or into life. But we need to be aware of those things and make sure that we mitigate. And it's constant learning. I have attended webinars. I just finished reading a book recently about implicit bias. It's really educating yourself and not having a head in the sand approach, not feeling like somebody's blaming you for this. It's something that everybody has and something we all need to work on.
With the demand of technology-driven processes, how will you continue to support automation to improve court proceedings and operations?
I have worked a little bit with Maya on the court process here. I work with the same system in a number of other places, and it has a lot of capabilities, and bringing those and going paperless would be my ultimate goal, and it can be done on the system. It's just about getting everybody to that comfort level and building the modules in that fit Commerce City. So definitely want to look at that, at building in the IT side of that. Also, continuing virtual. I think that people like virtual. I like virtual. I get to see people. Parents don't have to leave their jobs to come on the video call. People can do a traffic case from work. People are so comfortable on virtual. It's a whole different world. I get more questions now than I've ever gotten. People open up more. They feel just less intimidated, I think, with that virtual platform. So it's really looking at all those ways that we can continue to serve our community, because ultimately that's what we need to be doing. And we need to move as fast as our online presence can move.
What is your experience working with pro se defendants, and is your approach any different working with these individuals versus those who are represented?
I mean, there has to be somewhat of a difference because typically when a person is represented, you're speaking to their attorney. At times, I will talk to the defendant, ask them if they have any questions, always with the caveat of make sure you talk to your attorney first if you have any questions. So it's really, but also at the same time being kind and having the same expectations. Working with pro se people is probably 80% in municipal court, and so that's always what I've done. And I think it's really important for me to present to a pro se person what the judicial system, what the criminal justice system could look like. I never want to be the person that turns a person off from the judicial system. I want them to leave my courtroom thinking, that was fair. I'm not happy I got that ticket, but that was fair. She listened to me. She heard what I had to say. And really dealing with pro se people, it's their oftentimes first time coming into court. And so giving them that level of comfort to let them know it's okay to ask questions or to walk them through the process. Obviously, I can't give legal advice, but I can give as much advice or as much information as I want about a process. And I can tell them as much as I want about how it looks to go to a trial and what they need to bring. If they have evidence, they need to bring it on a, print out the pictures or put them on a flash drive so that you can have those available. I don't like people to be surprised. The court should be an open process. All of our virtual court sessions are open. Love for you guys to come and watch. Come to the courtroom and just see what that looks like. And the pro se folks, I want them just to leave thinking, all right, that was good.
Commerce City currently holds court proceedings on Wednesdays and Thursdays with additional responsibilities occurring throughout the week. Do you have the ability and are you committed in putting hours outside of Wednesday and Thursdays?
Yes. If I was not able to do it, I wouldn't have applied. It was definitely one of the considerations that I have to make. I've talked to my other small jurisdictions to let them know that things could change, that I may have to step away. So far, I think it'll work out. But my commitment would be here. I understand the docket. I would not be coming in here with pen a-blazing trying to change things. I know that this court runs that way, and that would be the intention, to leave it. And for myself to be here. A presiding judge is the one that needs to be here. I need to be available by phone and email. I answer my phone and email when calls and emails come in, even if it's the weekend. I am on call in some jurisdictions to do their weekend work, and so it's important to be available. My clerks and court administrator need to know that they can call me anytime.
Thank you.
What methods do you use, and what is your experience with managing a heavy docket or workload?
The dockets that I do in the different places definitely vary. I can do an 80-person docket in Denver and a 20-person docket in Hudson. And it really is time management, but also you have to be careful to make sure that you're still giving the people the time that they need. So it really is a good check-in process. It is knowing the cases ahead of time. I'm prepared. I look at the docket. I know what kind of cases are coming in front of me. I know what kind of advisement I need to give and how to approach if it's a traffic docket. The wording that I use to try to really hone in the options and the choices to get people to understand those. And sometimes they take longer, and that's okay. That's my job to hear what they want to say. But we do need to be able to move on. So if I have someone that's going especially long or that has a lot of questions, I don't hesitate to say, you know what, we have a lot to talk about. Let me call a couple of other cases. You write your questions down and bring them back up. It's important for them to be heard. It's also important for me to be mindful of the other people when we have a really big docket too.
Aside from the continuing education credits that judicial positions are required to complete, who do you seek guidance or mentorship from when you have issues or need a second opinion?
So the Municipal Judges Association in Colorado is such a fantastic group of people that are always willing to listen by email. I have trusted colleagues that I text or call, including Judge Juarez. I had a situation where I was called to be a witness in an attorney discipline case, and this was a person that I was a witness, not a complainant. It was while I was a prosecutor, and then I became a judge, and she is all of a sudden appearing in front of me, and I said, here's my reading of the rule, Judge, what do you think about that? And I was able to reach out to him and get some great advice on, yeah, you read that right, that's how you should handle it. And so having those trusted colleagues, and I definitely, because I am in so many places, do have a lot of outreach to those different folks.
Emotions are always high in the courtroom by all involved parties, and that may lead to a judge becoming upset. What would you do when you become upset on the bench while ensuring you are issuing a just verdict or decision? And if you could, please give us an example.
There's definitely different ways that a judge could become upset. Getting interrupted. I had a situation today. I was doing a Zoom court in Fort Collins, and this gal was calling in from another state. She had to be continued from the week before because she was so upset and disruptive in court. And my clerk had sent, and I was just covering, so I didn't see her last time, and my clerk had sent an email or a pop message that said, just so you know, she was a little difficult last time. So I had a little bit of a heads up, but when she came on, she was definitely difficult. Talking over me, being rude, saying that I was forcing her to enter a plea. And so there's two choices. You can play into that, or you can bring it back. And that's what I always choose to do, is bring it back. All right, I can tell you're really upset. Number one, let's just make rules. We don't talk over each other. I'm gonna let you go first because you have a lot to say. And then I'm gonna have a turn and you don't talk when I talk. And then I did a lot of explaining. She was very upset that the plea was taking so long. I just want to plead guilty, and she was very upset. I said, well, I have to have these legal requirements, and so I'm explaining and trying to be as nice and helpful as I can. And by the end, she was fine. She thanked me, and everything went smoothly. She entered her plea, was happy with the process. Yes, Judge, I can pay today. Thank you. Have a good day. And so it's really not letting yourself get to that point. Also can be times when it's emotionally draining, like if you have a juvenile who is clearly suffering at home. I had a situation where we had several cases, and the juvenile and his mom had to wait for a little bit. Mom got up and left the courtroom, and I'm thinking she went to the bathroom. No, she left the courthouse. So juvenile comes up, and I was like, hi there, where's your mom? Where'd she go? And he's like, I don't know, she left. So I had my clerks call her back. She was very, very upset. Not at me, at her son. I can't believe he does this, and just on and on about what a terrible kid this is. And his response is, well, why don't you tell her about you beating me or you burning me with cigarette butts? And so I'm up here feeling this emotion, and I have to hold it together. Even though my heart is breaking, And I have to really play mediator at that point. I have to be the authority in the courtroom, calm mom down, calm son down. I asked, the city attorney to look into a social services case. So there's a lot of ways that emotions can run high, and you really have to be able to manage those even when it's tough, and there are a lot of tough times.
All right, Judge Klein, those are all of the questions that we have for you this evening. There is time left in our interview, so at this point, we will open it up to counsel. If they have any questions for you, please raise your hand.
Thank you very much for interviewing with us. You mentioned that you'd like to get to know Commerce City better. Could you talk about how you would go about doing so?
Yeah, I would talk to the police department. I would talk to the clerks, obviously in the court more than I have. Driving around, seeing that, I would see what the community events are and try to attend some of those. And as a judge, you have to be careful about attending some community events. But I want to know what's happening in the community. I think it's important to look at council's strategic plan, which I have reviewed here, to see what your ideas are for making sure that we're serving the community here. And again, just getting out into the community and seeing what's out there, talking to the different treatment providers, working with the 17th, all of those things. It's not just coming here on Tuesday or on Wednesday and Thursday and sitting behind a bench. That's not enough.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, Judge Klein.
Thank you all.
We're also going to give you the opportunity if you have any questions for counsel or anybody in the room.
I think I asked a couple questions last time that were answered well. What is your expectation of the relationship between judge and counsel? Do you want 4 times a year reports, twice a year? How does that work now?
I'll answer that one. I've known Judge Juarez for a lot of years. And for most of his tenure, he was the judge while I was the mayor. The one thing that I think Judge Juarez did very, very well was communicate to the council any upcoming legislation, any changes that needed to be made. And frankly, he sometimes got tough with the council over changes that we were making because he had a strong belief that it could negatively impact some of our residents based on fines and things of that nature. So with that said, I would like you to come to the council and let us know anything that changes that we need to be aware of and how we can help the courts, as well as letting us know if we're doing something that may negatively affect your ability or the impact it may have on our community.
I appreciate that you're open to hearing that and that he has paved the way for that. In many of the cities that I work in, the court is just kind of there, and they assume that everything's running fine and just kind of do your thing. So I appreciate that you are wanting to have that information. That's important to me. What do you as counsel see as some of the main issues that we have to deal with here in our judicial system in the city?
Excuse me, Councilmember Hurst had a question also. Yeah,
No, I think I can combine my answer with the second question as well, because I talked about this earlier as well. I think for us, we are in a transition stage from being a small town to a city that is growing and continuing to be a larger player in the metro. And all of us on city council aren't experts in this area. And so we're going to need good communication and good plans on how to transition the court with the city on becoming bigger, being able to handle more cases. Is 2 days a week enough? Is the docket become too dense? All of that, I think, kind of can be attached to budget and everything else that goes into running a court. And so just want to make sure that that relationship stays open for not only the reasons that Councilman Ford said, but also so we can kind of see what's in the future for us. I think, being on council for 2.5, 3 years, that the court is running great. Judge Juarez did have a great reputation, never heard anything, never heard any complaints. But that doesn't mean that we can't plan for the future of where we need to be in 5 years. We can't use the talent that we already have here to continue to build a better court system to represent a city that's going to have 80,000, 90,000 in 10 to 15 years. We need to be ready to transition to that. So to me, that's a key part of our relationship, is finding out what's next for the courts, because that isn't always the focus of what city council is doing, like you're saying in the other municipalities.
Thank you. I'm remembering that you asked me a question about where I would be in 15 years, and it would still be here. My intention is that this is the job for me, just like it was for Judge Juarez. If you hire me, my intention is to make this my job.
Any other questions? I think we're done. Well, thank you, Judge Klein,
Thank you.
and we'll be reaching out to you shortly.
Thank you all for staying late. It's an hour later than I think you intended for this to be. It was quite interesting with the power outage and eating in the dark. But we got it done.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. Virtual handshakes.
Going to go ahead and continue on. Call the meeting back to order. At this time, I'm looking for a motion and second to enter into executive session pursuant to CRS 24-6-40243L to determine positions relative to negotiations with candidates for the position of municipal court judge and instructing negotiators accordingly, and pursuant to CRS 24-6-4024G for the consideration of documents protected from the mandatory non-disclosure provisions of the Colorado Open Records Act. Councilmember Noble?
So moved.
Councilmember Madera?
Second.
Okay. Is there any discussion? I have a motion and a second to enter into executive session. Can I get a voice vote? All those in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
It's passed by unanimous vote. We will now enter into executive session and the broadcast will end. There will be no action from the City Council tonight, and the meeting will automatically adjourn at the conclusion of the executive session. At this time, I would like to adjourn the council meeting so we can go into executive session.